Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stephen Kingcast, one man's musings on the works of Stephen King. Each week, I'll review one entry in the bibliography of Stephen King in the chronological order of publication. And this week, I am not reviewing a novel by Stephen King or a short story by Stephen King, a novella, or a collection of short stories by Stephen King. No, what I'm doing today is I'm going to be reviewing and giving my thoughts on the collection of stories inspired by the seminal foundational work by Stephen King, The Stand, collection that came out in late August. The End of the World as We Know It, New Tales of Stephen King's The Stand, edited by Christopher Golden and Brian Keene. So there's a lot to dive into with this one. There's a lot of conversation to be had about looking at the possibilities of what this means for Stephen King stories moving forward, the legacy of Stephen King, and then I'm also just going to talk about what worked about this collection, what didn't work about this collection, and my overall thoughts and takeaways. So before I get any further, welcome back, everyone. Welcome to the Stephen Kingcast. It's been a while. The last time that I recorded anything, it was for Never Flinch in early summer, I believe. There's just a lot. There's a lot that I have to get to that I haven't got to. I haven't talked about The Monkey yet. I haven't reviewed The Life of Chuck. And there's just a bunch of horror recommendations that I've been meaning to get to. I want to share my thoughts on a lot of really good horror novels that I have been soaking up over the last year. And then, we have in the next couple months a Bachman resurgence in cinemas with The Long Walk coming out this weekend. And next month, or in 2 months, Edgar Wright's The Running Man. So we're still in the midst of this Stephen King renaissance. I'm excited for that. So I don't know. I don't know what the future holds in terms of me doing these podcasts individually to review everything I just mentioned. But I can tell you right now, you're about to hear all of my thoughts on The End of the World as We Know It. Before I begin, I'm not going to read any emails, but if you have any thoughts on The End of the World as We Know It, or anything related to Stephen King, feel free to write into stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. And you can head on over to iTunes and leave a review. That would really help, make this little podcast stand out. It would give it its own little flavor. So head on over to iTunes, leave a review. Would be very, very helpful for me. All right, now let me get into The End of the World as We Know It. New Tales of Stephen King's The Stand, edited by Christopher Golden and Brian Keene. So when I first heard about this, I was both excited and skeptical, a little bit hesitant, because I thought that The Stand was very much a complete story. I didn't know what could be provided to this world, or come out of this world that wasn't already covered in Stephen King. And I'm going to get to this in much greater detail in the review itself. But I thought that there were some opportunities here for more perspective and different perspectives. And by opening it up to a more diverse audience, to get different tonal flavors and different life experiences that we didn't get in The Stand. So then I started to get a little bit excited. Then I thought about where The Stand left off, with the implication of, life being a constant cycle, which of course King later revises and refines with his concept of but life is a wheel. There's suggestion that despite the quote unquote good guys winning in The Stand, good has won. However, the wheel continues to turn, and there's the suggestion that it's all going to happen again, that the good guys are not going to be on top forever. So I was excited at the possibility of what the sandbox could look like with that as something to play around in. So then, I like I said, there was some hesitation that I had, but then I said, okay, there's a lot of possibility here. There's a lot of possibility that we can dive into in and around the world of The Stand. my biggest hesitation was the concern that this could read as fanfic. And without spoiling the rest of the review of this collection, it's a little from column A, it's a little from column B. And what I'm going to do is get into each of the 4 different sections of this collection, which is, and they're broken up kind of chronologically in the history of the stand. So part 1, Down with the Sickness, takes place during the early stages of the onslaught of Captain Trips. Part 2 is The Long Walk, and that has a lot to do with everyone has is either, it's kind of like a crossover. It's a blending between part 1 and part 2, where yes, you still get some of the, oh, everyone I know is dying and about to die, and what happens, oh, well, I'm getting these dreams, I need to go somewhere. So we're getting a lot of that. Life is Such a Wheel. Life Was Such a Wheel. It takes place after the events of the stand. And part 4, Other Worlds Than These, are ones that don't fit neatly in the other 3 boxes. So what I'm going to do for part 1 and part 2, I'm going to rank them in order of ones I liked the least to the ones that I thought really stood out. So rather than ranking all of them, I'm breaking it chunk by chunk of the different 4 sections. Actually, no, let me rephrase that. In the first 2 sections, that's how I'm going to do it. I think that the way that these stories are arranged in part 3 actually work very well in the order in which they are presented, and as a result, I will review them in the order that they were presented to me as the reader. So in part 1, we have 17 stories that take place in the early summer weeks of the stand during the downfall of civilization by Captain Trips. So like I said, I'm going to rank them from least favorite to favorite. So number 16 and 17 are tied for me, and that is The Trips and Room 24. And these happen to be the first 2 stories right off the bat. And be perfectly honest, and I don't want to disparage the authors, because they're effective in their own way. They just kind of both turned me off. I found them both to be very bleak, and with The Trips, it was a story that showed the worst aspects of humanity through the eyes of young survivors. And in Room 24, it was obsession at the end of the world, and it's just gross. It's just really a gross, icky story. It's mean. It's a mean story. Both of them are mean, and I just personally did not like them. And then with The Trips, what wound up happening was it deployed the dreams that people had during this time frame of Randall Flagg and Mother Abigail. And we had seen these dreams time and time again throughout the course of the stand, clearly. It was a major plot point. But I felt that the way that the dream was deployed in The Trips did not really fit consistently with how the dreams were presented to us in the stand. It felt a little... So in The Trips, it almost seems as if people are driven to murder and be quote-unquote bad, like evil with the dreams. That Randall Flagg is like maybe infecting people. So actually, I was going to get to this later. Let me get to this now. Maybe I'm misremembering The Stand. It's a book that I've read countless times, and it's been about 10 years now, which is crazy. You can read my review on, you can listen to my review right here on this feed, a multi-part breakdown of The Stand. But the way that I remember the dreams, and again, maybe I'm wrong, but I thought that they functioned more as kind of like radio signals being broadcast across the psyche throughout the world. And people picked up these receptions in their minds based on the calibration and the dial of their soul and their heart. They would kind of be tuned in more to one station than the other, right? That's kind of how I saw it. And yes, within the dreams, we had Mother Abigail speaking directly to our characters. We had Randall Flagg luring other characters for sure. But I just kind of got the impression that it wasn't like Mother Abigail was dreaming every night and sitting down with a Santa Claus list of all of the good boys and girls in the world that she was going to talk to in her dreams, right? In their dreams. And same thing with Randall Flagg. It's not like as if he had this giant tome of all of the bad kids that he was going to speak to directly. It's more that these dreams were, like I said, these radio signals that were being tailored to the frequencies of each person, right? Our antenna, we're picking these up, and much like dreams do, they are, there's our brains, whatever goes into dreams, they filter and they process things. And that's kind of what I always got the impression of. And Mother Abigail, she would recognize people, she would know them for sure, but there is a specificity to the way that the dreams are being used here that I don't recall it being that way in the books. Maybe I'm wrong, but the way that they're deployed in the trips seems that the dreams are making people bad. And I just don't think that that's the whole point, and I don't think that is the way that the dreams were presented in The Stand. And again, I could be wrong. It has been a while since I've read them. But either way, those ones I didn't really like them as much. Then we had at 15, we had The Human Voices Wake Us and We Drown by Poppy C. Bright. This location, I was really interested in this location taking place on Martha's Vineyard, which I thought was really neat. It's a similar location to a story I'll get to later, Lockdown. And I like, and I'll get to this more when I encounter some other stories like this. I like these stories that are taking place not on the continental United States. I think that this being separated from the continental United States is an important piece that was never explored. What is life like for the survivors who might be receiving these dreams but cannot physically go to either Nebraska or Colorado or Las Vegas? What happens to them? What is their story like? What is their journey like? So when we started to get these stories, I was really, really interested, and some are more effective than others. And at 15, we have The Human Voices Wake Us and We Drown. And the reason why I had this one so low is because I feel that some stories within this collection feel like they really are part of the world of The Stand, that these stories are born out of the concept of this collection, inspired by the Stand. Some stories, I'll get to, feel like they are strong enough to stand on their own without being a part of The Stand. They could be their own survivalist tales, and I think that we have some of those in here, and they've been retrofitted to fit this. That's what it feels like to me. And some stories feel like pre-existing written work that were, again, edited to be included here. And this is one of them. I think that The Human Voices Wake Us and We Drown is still the same story that it is, even if it isn't taking place at the end of the world. And I would bet you that Poppy C. Bright had already had this written heard about this collection or was reached out to by Brian Keene and Christopher Golden, and kind of dusted it off and added this post-apocalyptic world component to it in the wake of Captain Trips, and then published it. And I was kind of into it at the beginning, like I said, for the setting and the distance between the location and the primary source of action from the stand. But then it takes a very weird, bizarre turn that I just don't get it. I don't understand the point of it. The entire time, I just kept asking myself, why am I reading this? Why am I reading about this weird mermaid sea slug sex plot? I don't understand what Poppy Z. Bright was trying to say. There's some components to the story about homosexuality and AIDS, and if there is a larger message that they're trying to convey, it's not one that I was able to discern. So this is actually where I need all of your help. That if you think that there is something that I missed, please write into stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. But as far as I could tell from this, it just was a weird story that was tonally a mismatch from the rest of this collection. I'm so sorry, guys. My furry co-host was outside. She wanted to be a part of this podcast. She was barking up a storm. Now she has joined me on the couch. If she starts barking, I do apologize. It is unpredictable when she does it, and it is very piercing. I'll try to edit it out if she does, but if you hear a sharp, I'm looking at you, if you hear a very sharp barking, that is my furry co-host just saying hi to some squirrels outside. At number 14, we had Bright Light Big City. Let me pull up I didn't write down the author on this one. Bright Light Big City Bright Light City, Meg Gardner. So this one, it's survivors in Las Vegas trying to get out as the world around them crumbles. It was okay. I don't really have any strong feelings about it one way or another. For me, it was nothing that we hadn't seen before, but it was nicely done. That's kind of all I have to say about that one. So then we have Prey Instinct. I liked Prey Instinct. Prey Instinct, written by Haley Piper. See, this is what I had kind of been looking for more. Less Stephen King fanfic, right? That was what I did not want. And I wanted different perspectives, different tones, different approaches stylistically to the concept of the stand. And we get that with Prey Instinct. I thought it was beautifully written. I thought it had a really fresh perspective. I thought that the author fed the tropes of the stand through her own sensibilities. And we wound up getting a depiction of Captain Trips personified as death, taking many forms to come for the main character. It devolves into more standard fare by the end, but the quiet contemplation about the pursuit of death in its many forms, especially for a queer person at this time chronologically in history, following in the wake of the AIDS crisis, I thought it was riveting. I thought it was contemplative and meaningful. Once the antagonistic stranger showed up and there was a random tiger there, it became a lesser story. But the first half of it, I thought, had a lot of weight, and it was definitely worth recommending, and I really enjoyed it. And then we had African Painted Dog. So this was by Catriona Ward, and I had to look up African Painted Dog, what they looked like in the on the internet, because I hadn't seen them before. So African Painted Dog, just trigger warning, spoiler alert. Animal lovers might have a hard time with this one. This one was it was kind of hard to read. these are cool looking animals, by the way, African painted dogs. It was hard to read. There's a lot of animal cruelty in this story. So at the end of the world, it's not as if animal lovers are flourishing, and with us at our most extreme selves, it's going to give into depravity. The perspective was through the eyes of these two brother dogs, these African painted dogs, and it's all about their perspective as the world falls apart and their escape from the world they've known within their enclosure at a zoo, and their coming face to face with the horrors of humanity in the post-apocalypse. Spoiler alert: there is redemption, not redemption, but there's hope for them at the end, where they do escape the villainous clutches of humans, and they're able to go into this new America, into the wilderness. So it was hard to read for me, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't effective. In fact, for fans of comic books like We Three by Grant Morrison, or Pride of Baghdad by Brian K. Vaughan, I would recommend this story. And similarly, if you liked this and you haven't read We Three or Pride of Baghdad, then I think that you would benefit from this. More so Pride of Baghdad. It's very, very similar in its concept. And then we had Every Dog Had Its Day. I sometimes forgot to write down the names of everyone here. Every Dog Had Its Day. It's one of its the earlier stories in the collection by Brian Smith. To me, this was a very simple story. That to me had a character that had similar vibes to Julie Lowery from The Stand. Not nearly as mean or as low, but definitely flashes of Julie. But really, it was just the suburbs. Captain Trips hits the suburbs, and this one teen is trying to start off his new life, still 1 foot in the old world, and 1 foot in the new, and he's really just trying to find a dog, and the conflict that comes along the way. So it's not trying to do much, but it is effective for what it is trying to do. And then we have Make Your Own Way by Amakatsu. And again, this is, we get a little bit of a different perspective here. Stephen King is not a horse girl, so he's not really able to provide the horse girl experience. And what I mean by that is, the people that grow up around horses, and have a deep family-based, professional, and almost spiritual connection to horses. So we have that depicted here with Make Your Own Way, in which a young farmer who owns a horse, who survives the Captain Trips. They're together on their farm, and it's her meeting a man, and their disagreement, their fallout in the post-apocalypse, and her making her way. It's really a very simple story. I thought it was very nicely written. I cared enough about this character and her horse. I was very worried about the horse throughout the entire story, as she had a philosophical disagreement with the man that she meets, who comes through, who you kind of root for at first. Like, you want these two to get together. Like, he seems nice, she seems nice, but unfortunately it wasn't meant to be. He's dreaming of Randall Flagg, and he makes his way west. All right. And then we have Grace. At number 9, I put Grace, by Tim Leben. Now, this was the different sort of story that I had been looking for when I heard about this collection. I thought about the possibilities. This did not cross my mind that this could be a possibility. So when I read this, it was such a breath of fresh air for me to be able to experience this. So at first, upon cracking it open and starting to read it, I groaned because it was yet another dream sequence. I was sick of them by this point. I was sick of them by The Stand, and then here we have more. But upon this character awakening, we realize that we're on a space shuttle, and I am locked in. What a great concept! It doesn't matter if the story falls apart, and I have quibbles with the story's conclusion, but it's trying something completely different, and I'm all for it. What do astronauts do while the world below them falls apart? It's a wonderful concept, and Levin gives snippets of the rest of the world that makes me want more. A naval battle in the English Channel, fantastic. Other countries' names for the super flu, fantastic. And then we get more like passing over the Atlantic Ocean. They picked up a distress call from a cruise ship that was adrift with no crew left alive or able to work. The call was from a 7-year-old child whose mother was telling her how to use the radio. The girl was fine. She said her mommy was feeling poorly and a man had fallen over in the kids' play area. Approaching Europe, Matt tuned into several big news agencies and listened to the reports. All of them were dreadful and tragic. None projected hope. A French channel broadcast what appeared to be a series of public executions of government officials. An English voice talked of skirmishes all along the south coast as boats from Europe attempted to land. On one Spanish radio station played frantic guitar music with the presenter coughing and shouting over the top. Matt was pleased he didn't speak Spanish. He understood enough, though. He felt like the kid on the ocean liner adrift and asking for help from a world that no longer had the ability to care. So I thought that was really cool to get those snippets, because we got Stephen King turned over every rock on his story of America in this post-apocalyptic world that he gave us originally with The Stand, and then The Stand, when he republished it, the unabridged edition. I'm not saying that we should have gotten these things in the book, because I don't need to know what's occurring in the English Channel or in Spain or in space, or in the middle of the ocean. I don't need to know, because The Stand is through the perspective of Americans, and it's a decidedly American story about the country of America. So our characters would not know what's occurring in other countries or in space. They would not have they wouldn't have the perspective to be able to deliver these stories. So it's really not The Stand. It's not so much a story about the end of the world as it is about America. And because the perspective is through the eyes of your everyman and every woman characters, you're not going to get this insight into what's occurring in other countries, nor should you. But an anthology designed to tell more tales in the world of The Stand, the more these stories should be, and they should be bold enough to take place outside of America. And this story was bold enough to be above America and the Earth itself. However, what's interesting to note is that the story takes place above the Earth's orbit in space. It's strangely the thing that is most closely linked to the events of The Stand itself. With the emergence of Mother Abigail and Flag as active characters, pulling and pushing the story's main characters, the space crew, their actions have direct and significant impact on the events of The Stand themselves. And I think that your mileage is going to vary with this. I'm sure that for a lot of people, I can completely understand why. The idea of almost a secret chapter of The Stand taking place with Mother Abigail and Randall Flagg locked in a battle of wills, manipulating astronauts in space. I imagine that for a lot of people, it's going to be really exciting. For me, it places those characters in positions that I just never saw them in before. and speaks to a larger issue that I'm having with these anthology stories. Like I said, maybe I'm misremembering, but I always thought of the dreams that the people had were more like picking up those radio stations from a broadcast tower. And here, the interactions between the looming threat of Flag and the benevolence of Mother Abigail are very personalized and specific to each person. And I know that in dreams, our main character in The Stand had very specific dreams personalized to them, and it looked like Flag was an antagonistic force for them and vice versa. But in many of these stories, Flag seems to be able to manipulate people in ways that I hadn't seen before and I don't quite remember from The Stand. And Mother Abigail can speak to people in ways that I don't recall before. It gives these two characters far more omnipotence and power that I remember them having. For me, this story, like many of the stories, would work better if it was existing within the world of The Stand, but not being so linked to the events with the characters that we have come to know. With all that being said, the sheer boldness of setting it in a space station above the Earth is really cool, and I really give it a lot of credit. Then we have at number 8, Kovac's Last Case by Michael Corita. Hey, up front we got a nice little Project Arrowhead reference. I thought that was a nice little Easter egg. Yeah, again, in terms of perspective, this was really cool. I really liked this idea that it was a homicide detective working a case in the post-apocalypse. It's as simple as that. And through it, there's observations about the nature of humanity that are refreshing. At one point, Detective Kovac hears laughter, like kind laughter, and he holds on to that. And I think that that's important, especially in a section of this anthology where so many of the stories are bleak and focus on, you know, what we have gotten so much from, like, The Walking Dead, of just, you know, you can't trust the people. Like, you know, don't worry about the zombies. It's the people you gotta watch out for. Like, we get a lot of that. It's just like, I don't know, like, the wrong people lived. You know, but here we get a really interesting story. It's a detective working a case, and what he uncovers, the mystery and the him uncovering the mystery of the case that he is pursuing leads to an interesting moral quandary for him. So I thought that was good. At number 7 by Alex Segura, we have Lamara Ora. Again, this is a different perspective than we have seen before. It's a mother and daughter on the run from an abusive husband-father in a post-apocalyptic world. It's a short story. It's to the point. The title is derived from a feeling of dread that has overcome the main character. Constant fear, not from the decimated world, but from an abusive man and an abusive life she was trying to flee. It's the kind of story that I like, where the post-apocalyptic plague decimating the world is just a backdrop for something deeper and meatier. Stephen King did everything he possibly could that you possibly could do in telling a story about societies and governments and morality. He gave us so many different types of people and so many different backgrounds and different idiosyncrasies and beliefs, and played them off against each other, that we don't need. We don't need any more of that. We got it. He perfected it. But with this, you know what? Captain Trips, the plague, the dreams, the end of the world, none of that matters. The only thing that matters is a woman and her child trying to escape an abusive man, and the feeling of oppression and fear and anxiety and ultimately freedom that comes. That's what's important. That's the story being told. Then we have Lenora. Lenora was a real interesting one. Lenora is by Jonathan Jans, and it's a story about a man's tragic past of love and the dik-dik. Again, another animal that I wasn't aware of. that he tries and fails to save at the end of the world. This guy, like, you care about this main character who, prior to the events of the super flu, he had lost his family in a tragic fire, and so he's living in tragedy. And in the wake of the world, he gets a little bit of redemption by this animal in a wild animal enclosure that has gotten free but had been tortured by this serial killer who is just loving life now that the world has ended. And the main character, despite saving the Dick, can't save the Lenora from the super flu, and it's sad. It's really sad. And it was like almost too sad for me to read, to be perfectly honest. Like, I really fell for this one, hook, line, sinker. But his unwillingness to give up on life leads him to save a little girl and truly find that redemption. And I can totally see this main character hitting the road and going to join our main characters in Colorado. All right, then we had Moving Day by Richard Chismar. Richard Chismar, who is no stranger to Stephen King. He was a he co-wrote the Gwendy books, and he fully wrote the final Gwendy book in the trilogy. And what he gave us here, it was a very nice slice of life. We got a different perspective than what we have seen before. He was a 15-year-old boy whose father kills himself in the opening sequence, which was really hard to read, and it really creates a sense of vulnerability for our 15-year-old. Imagine being 15 years old, okay, and knowing that your father had survived Captain Trips, okay, was not sick, and purposely takes his own life, leaving you behind. That's awful. So you really, like, that sympathy and vulnerability is built in, and you have that empathy. You care about this main character, and it just puts him in an incredibly vulnerable situation and gives you a sense of investment and rooting for him to see him succeed in this world that has fallen apart globally and personally. It was slow. This is a slow story. It's a quiet story. It does not aim to do much, and I very much liked it for that. The sequences of him on the water tower looking out the world below, this small little town, as he's observing people travel through it during the week of the super flu, it was nicely rendered. It was picturesque, and if the events, some of which were horrific, it was still there was like a peace to it. And what is very noticeable and notable about this is that the main character, who had been listening to and singing Baby Can You Dig Your Man, actually observe unknowingly, if I'm reading this right, Larry himself in the days that he still trekked with Rita. In fact, the boy bears witness to Larry's discovery of her body. I could be wrong. Again, it's been about 10 years since I've read it, but when I was reading this, I'm like, this is just Larry and Rita from someone else's perspective. If it's not Larry and Rita, then they're stand-ins. They're meant to invoke that. And as you know, I've been hesitant about such overt connections. That was the issue that I had with the space story, but this one's harmless enough, and it's dwarfed by the overall strength of the story. Because it's not the strength is not rested in the tenuous connection between this character and the more famous characters from The Stand, but in the depiction of this 15-year-old boy in a small Vermont town surviving despite the personal tragedy that he suffered. So Moving Day, that was good. At number 4, I have Lockdown. Lockdown, written by... sorry. I'm pulling it up right now. Lockdown, written by Bev Vincent. So, okay, again, no stranger to Stephen King. And this one felt familiar. Felt like King, very similar to King. I mean, it takes place on a main island, so the characters presented within this story are not dissimilar. They're not unfamiliar to us as readers. The types of characters, I should say, these are not characters that we know. But it was different. It was different perspective than we had seen before. There she goes. I'm sorry, guys. Yeah, I'm sorry. She sees a squirrel in the front yard and then immediately goes barking to go in the backyard. She hasn't figured that out yet. All right, what I liked a lot about this, aside from the fact that it was, taking place on an island, which created a different tension and a different conflict than we had seen before in the works of The Stand, but it also played up our now shared understanding of lockdown. All right. So I think that this was the first of the stories that I had read that really played into and used our real life experience with COVID-19, the pandemic, lockdown, quarantine, all of that. I think that this was the first story to actually incorporate that shared understanding and use that as a springboard to tell the story set within the chronology of The Stand, but with our real world understanding and feelings and connections to lockdown. I don't think that it is a coincidence that it's called lockdown when lockdown has such strong connotations for all of us in a post-COVID world. And Bev Vincent is able to invoke all of that and make it very real, but not in a cloying way where we're transplanting the sensibilities and the specifics of 2020 into 1990. This very much felt of the time, but with our understandings of what lockdown brings about. So we have this island that is protected, right? Because it is separated from the rest of the world. There's no way for Captain Trips to get to it at the moment. So the question is, how do they maintain that? And with that concept comes the disagreement of what to do and how to stay quarantined, and the feeling of isolation that comes with that, and people not willing to stick with that, and the conflict that arises felt very true to what we all lived through, and the truth of these characters. We understand the decision of these characters much more clearly than audiences would have in either of the two Stand publication dates. Yes, we get more of the characters having the dreams, which to me feel a little bit more consistent to King's depictions of the dreams than some of the other stories that I had issues with. And if the dream component hadn't been there at all, this would have been just as strong, if not stronger, a story than it was. But I really enjoyed Lockdown because, like I said, I think it was one of the stories that really took advantage of what these stories could be, which was basically to tell a modern story. This was a modern story set within 1990. So I was really impressed with that one. At number 3, we have The Hope Boat, which again was something that I had wanted more of. Talk about different perspectives, when it comes to, and this is by Gabino Iglesias. So as much as I liked Lockdown, and I liked it for the fact that the setting was different and allowed for a different story, at the end of the day, it's a story about a bunch of Maine people, older Maine people, and that's not exactly fresh in a Stephen King world. Well, with The Hope Boat, we do get a fresh perspective. And this is what I had wanted when I thought of a collection of stories inspired by the book. This was fresh. A lot of the stories leading up to this one did feel derivative and familiar. But the Hope Boat, this story about the superflu on the island of Puerto Rico, allowed for a fresh point of view that we hadn't seen before. And unlike some of the other stories, we've seen what happens in a city. We've seen what happens in different regions within the country. We've seen what happens in the suburbs. We've seen what happens in small towns. We've seen what happens in cities. We've seen what happens in the different geographies within the continental United States. But what we haven't seen is what happens on the island of Puerto Rico and how the survivors would be affected. And it was a short but incredibly impactful story about loss. One benefit from the anthologies like this is that they get to introduce you to new authors. And this author, Gabino Iglesias, made me stand up and take note. He did a lot in a short amount of time. And Sandra's loss of baby Angie is devastating to read. The ending is a banger, leaving for the reader to decide for themselves which walk she took, one of hope or one of despair. It was similar, I'm going to get to this one in a little bit, to the Lansdale story in the sense that it could completely stand on its own. This did not include references from The Stand, and it did not include the dreams, like so many of the other stories have been. So this one just really, the strength of the writing, the strength of the characters, the strength of what the characters are going through, the tension, the conflict, the characterization, the setting, all of this created an incredibly rich, strong story that made me think about it when I was done. So when I moved on to the next story, I was still thinking about the Hope Boat, and that is a testament to the power of that story and its writer. All right, number two. To be perfectly honest, number two and number one are kind of interchangeable. It's hard for me to choose one over the other. I've thought about this in the past couple days, and if I was going to change my mind, but I'm just going to kind of treat it like 1A and 1B. So I'll get to the next one, the last one of this section. But first, let me talk about C. Robert Cargill's Wrong Fucking Place, Wrong Fucking Time. When I first started reading this one, I was hesitant. I was really hesitant. I was like maybe about to give up on the book because it seemed that it was just going to be another story of survivors in a Texas town. But very quickly, C. Robert Cargill gave it his own spin, and it made for what a refreshing read this was. It had a completely different tone and sense of humor than the other stories, and its own sense of style that made it stand out. I mean, this truly, it's like the subtitle of this anthology states, New Tales of Stephen King's The Stand. All right, so this is a new tale, all right, within the world of The Stand. It's a new tale, meaning for me, everything about it is new. It trades in expectation and plays those expectations against the reader, and I was very tickled at that. Like I said, I was groaning at first that we were going to get just another Texas story set within the world of The Stand. But the story of Bill and Alan and Derek and the love of movies as the world was ending really hit home. I mean, we got wonderful contemplative passages like... Okay, so one of the characters says there's a shop in Fredericksburg that sells everything you need. I thought it might be fun and, cheaper to make my own beer, that is. Makes more sense now with that there being only so much beer left in the local stores. Anyhow, for 10,000 years, man has made beer. And every day, after a long day of hunting or gathering or farming, man would sit down with his friends around a campfire and tell stories. Yeah, I get that, said Bill. Well, it ain't a campfire, but I reckon sitting around a glowing box with friends and letting it tell us stories is about the same. Oh, I mean, there is a bunch of passages like that in this story. And I going back to COVID, I talked about Bev Vincent and Lockdown, which I felt was very much inspired by 2020. Similarly, C. Robert Cargill, screenwriter, understands the importance of cinema, or not just cinema, but just stories that we get audiovisually, whether it's in a movie theater or on the television. And do not forget, when we write about contagion and infection, fallout, and just surviving in a world like this, it's going to be shaped with our experience from 2020. So to have a story about the healing nature of TV, it's not only a love letter to the power of stories, it's a reminder of how we all got through COVID. Don't forget, like when COVID first hit, think about how big Tiger King was. And I'm not joking. I'm not trying to minimize this. It actually was a very powerful, potent piece of the 2020 story. And part of that was that ridiculous documentary was something that everyone was talking about, and it unified all of us, and it kind of made things normal. Because for a split second there, we weren't worrying about dying. We weren't worrying about what was going to happen to our jobs or our loved ones, or not being able to see our friends. We just cared about this stupid story of ridiculous people and their obsession with big cats. And I honestly also think that the success of Ted Lasso, which also came out in March of 2020, have everything to do with, at that time, we needed hope. We needed a hopeful story, and it came through television. So I think that C. Robert Cargill here is really speaking about, it's not about the end of the world. This story is not, like so many of these stories, is not about the end of the world. This story is about our relationship to stories and the healing nature of stories, and specifically horror stories. And it's beautiful, much in the way that like it has like some Shaun of the Dead feels to it, So, I mean, to have this story be about the healing nature of TV, it's not only a love letter to the power of stories, it really is also a reminder of how we all got through COVID. And yeah, it's it's the understanding and enjoyment of horror movies that saves the day, which really, really cracks me up. The image of Bill coming around the corner with the chainsaw and machete and saving the day, it's legitimately funny and heroic. In such a bizarre and fun way. This was just hands down, like full stop. This is a really, really good story that I enjoyed. I really, really enjoyed, from its statement on the power of movies, the purpose of horror, what we can learn from it, and the decency of humanity, even if it means having to chainsaw a bunch of people that were trying to kill you. It's really just not just one of the best stories in this collection. It's one of the best stories that I've read in a very long time. It was really, really good. Yeah, and then for number one, I decided to go with Joe Lansdale's In a Pig's Eye. This is a story that falls within the world of The Stand, but also I feel could have just as easily been its own story. It does not feel like a Stephen King story. As far as I remember, it doesn't even mention the dreams at all. This, for anyone that has read Joe Lansdale, he has a distinct prose and style unto himself. And this is not him trying to ape King in any way. He's full on being Joe Lansdale. His sentence pack power. They're Hemingway-esque in many ways, but there's a poetry to them. He tells this story of a survivor in this post-apocalyptic world, in his quiet heroism, his matter-of-fact survivalism, the ways in which he is able to evade small town violence out in the woods using survivalist skills, outsmarting both man and animal, to just survive. Again, this is a story that could stand on its own. It does not need to be set within a collection of stories inspired by The Stand. This could be, if COVID took an even worse turn, this could be, a comet hit the Earth. I mean, this could be inspired by, works inspired by Cormac McCarthy's The Road. This nothing about this screams The Stand. This is just an honest to goodness, really strong Joe Lansdale short story. It's really, really well worth it, and it's one that it was like the first one. Like, it came right after lockdown, so Room 24 and The Trips were the first two, and I was out. I did not like those. Bright Light City, I thought was derivative of other Stephen King. I thought it was fine, but it wasn't anything. It was fine. It was just fine. Every Dog Had Its Day. I was like, okay. I thought it was a little hopeful, little different, little slice of life. Then we get Lockdown. And I was really into Lockdown. Then we get In a Pig's Eye. And then Lansdale just slams down the gauntlet and says, who's going to pick this up? Who's going to do better than I just did? And then we get Lenora, which I liked. Then we get The Hope Boat, which I liked. Then we get Wrong Fucking Place, Wrong Fucking Time. And then it's off to the races. Then we get just varying levels of really good stories. Until we get Till Human Voices Wake Us Up When We Drown, which I just don't understand. There's something that I'm missing about that one. But, I thought it was a really strong story, really, really good. If you haven't read Lansdale, you really should. He's a guy who really knows what he's doing. All right, so that's the collection of the first section, and then with part 2. We have The Long Walk. Okay, and again, I'm going to put this in not in the chronological order that they were published in, but in the order that really spoke to me. And here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 stories. And up first we have by Josh Malerman of Bird Box fame. It's called I Love the Dead. This is a story not about the dead people. It's about the dead, as in the Grateful Dead. And it is very much a story about the Grateful Dead. And if you like the Grateful Dead, I'm sure you're going to like the story. If you're not a Deadhead, I don't know if you're going to like it. I didn't like it. I'm not a Deadhead, and I just thought it was eh. Then we had Across the Pond. And Across the Pond was written by V. Castro. Here we had 2 flag worshippers in London. So at first, I was totally into it. I really liked the idea, again, for the same reason that I talked about The Hope Boat and Lockdown. I like the idea of these stories where the main characters of these stories cannot, by geography, interact with any of the characters or the plots of the Stand. What does that do to them? What does that do for them? What are their lives? What is their post-apocalyptic life like? What are their challenges? What are their hopes? What do they work toward? I was interested to see where that went. And, to V. Castro's credit, there are some really interesting depictions of, exploring, these famous locations within London, ravaged, that's been ravaged by, Captain Trips. However, we get the dreams back again. They come on very, very strong. And it's ultimately it just gets into sexual assaults. And again, like I said, with the first 2 stories of this collection, The Trips and Room 24, there's just an ugliness to those 2 stories, and there's an ugliness to this that I don't know. I get it. I get it. At the end of the world, there's going to be sexual assault. There was sexual assault in the stand itself. I don't know. I guess like I'm just at a point in my life. I don't need to read about it to know that that's a horrible aspect of humanity. Yeah, just it is what it was, and it was fine, I guess, for what it was. Then we get The Boatman by Tananarive Due and Stephen Barnes. This is a story about a 13-year-old girl in Key West. So again, we get this isolated location. I was totally into it. I liked it. I like that there is this whole pirates component to it, both pirates on the land and the idea of pirates on the ocean. It became an open ocean story with danger all around, with this young 13-year-old girl. This poor girl, like, it's still like misogyny and the danger of men. It doesn't go away when the world ends, and that's present in The Boatman. So this was a good story. It's a very contemplative one, and it's thrilling. And again, by being able to put a lot of the action on being able to get out into the ocean and what occurs while on the ocean, it makes for a very, very interesting read. All right, and then we have, I apologize if I mispronounce this, Milagros by Cynthia Pelalo. And this is what I'm talking about. Again, this is another story set within Puerto Rico in the days after the outbreak. And I'm just more interested in the stories of the characters whose circumstances don't lend themselves neatly to traversing the continental United States. And here, we got a young island girl and her pet chicken attempting to brave the waters towards a new future. Does this invoke Moana to you? Different island, different culture, different geography, sure. But that definitely came to mind for me. But unlike the Disney heroine, things don't fare as successfully for our main character. It's a very small, very sad little story that focuses on characters who have it a little harder in a very hard world. All right. Then we have The Legion of Swine by S.A. Crosby. And as far as I remember, I don't think that we got a story set within Appalachia country in the stand. So this gave us another story about an Appalachian pig farmer trying to reckon with travelers of Flag. We get a nice little nod to the Dark Tower with the reference of Flag being Legion. Again, now I know it's a biblical reference, duh. But, in the first edition of The Gunslinger, we had reference to Legion. So I thought that was a nice little shout out there. Okay. And then up next, we have Abigail's Gethsemane. Is that how you pronounce it? Sorry, I'm not too much of a churchgoer. But this was by Wayne Brady. Yes, the Wayne Brady. And it was Wayne Brady and Maurice Brodus. So again, I wasn't sure how I would feel about a story directly involving the main characters of The Stand, because like I said, that story had been told. It had been told once in the 80s, and then it was told again longer and updated in 1990. So I wasn't sure going into this if that was going to happen, if we were going to get like the lost scenes of Larry Underwood or what happens to Stu and Fran afterwards. I didn't know what we were going to get, but I was kind of hesitant about people being about writers directly picking up where Stephen King left off with his characters. Concepts, yeah, I was kind of expecting that, but not characters. And so when I saw the title of this book and I started reading it, I wasn't sure how I felt. But ultimately, you know what? I gotta say, this was a really nice reunion with Mother Abigail. And it was an interesting take. Again, like we're talking about different perspectives here. This was not just set at Hemingford Home. This wasn't just set in Boulder. Like this is not set during the times that we know of. This is set during times that we weren't we did not know of. Okay, we knew of it, like we knew that that Mother Abigail lived a very long life. Okay, for sure, and so we get that. We get a glimpse of an early part of her life. And more interestingly to that is that this story is also set during the events of the Stand, when we do know Mother Abigail. However, in the Stand, we only see her disappearance through the other characters and how they react to her having disappeared. But we get snippets of her perspective, and this becomes the temptation of Abigail, both in her present, right before her death, and in the past. So these two moments of life are very interesting, and it's with the understanding that she is this Jesus Christ figure, and so it plays upon these classic stories of Jesus. And in the past, we see her relationship with God juxtaposed against a lynching. And Flag makes an appearance. If not as a character, I don't like to think that that's actually Flag, but I like to think that that's Flag as a concept, symbolically, appearing as the embodiment of mob mentality, of bloodlust, of base desires, of irrationality, where logic cannot prevail, that this dense outpouring of hate has coalesced and it's impenetrable, and this is her first act of becoming ultimately the savior and this woman that we knew her to be. This is her first stand that she takes against racism, against these base desires and the ugliness of humanity, and she doesn't give up faith. She doesn't give up hope, and she opposes this then, prior to the world's collapse, and she opposes it again during the world's collapse and after the world's collapse. And this was a nice celebration of a character, and it was also good. Stephen King, I think wrote a great character with Mother Abigail, but at times, he can fall into the magic Negro trope. And Mother Abigail can fall into that. So it was nice to actually have, someone who is black writing the character and giving us this history of a character only a way that someone who is black will be able to provide that perspective, And I think that that's what I was looking for in this text, was what can someone's perspective tell us about the characters and events that would take place within this world, So that I thought that was a really, really good one, despite the fact that it was involving directly a character from The Stand. I thought it was very, very strong. Also very strong by Rio Ewers is Keep the Devil Down. And what I really liked was this protagonist fighting to prove her redemption and her worthiness of redemption. She needed to validate that her life is more than what she had been brought up around. And this is the sort of meaty, themey story that I had been looking for. And it was one that I was chewing on as I was reading it, because I like the idea, and it kind of flirts with it, doesn't quite go there. This is a character that, I had hoped to get stories of a character dreaming about Randall Flagg and being, if he or she had just gone to Las Vegas, it would have made sense. But maybe a story about, someone who should, by all rights, have gravitated for great, Vegas, but said, no, I don't want to. I don't want to be that person. I want to go to Boulder instead. I would have liked that. And in a sense, we do get that without it being that overt. We get someone who has been told her entire life that she's trash, that she is nothing, that she is someone that should go to Vegas. But Lisa's surroundings here are reflecting badly upon her so much that she begins to doubt that she's a good person, and doubts herself enough to make the journey to Nebraska. But she persists. And I like that this idea that, you're tuning into these radio stations, but they're not telling you who you are. you ultimately have a choice that you need to make. And I like that. And this is a person who is choosing hope and choosing that she wants to be the person that she believes that she can be. And also, the story is very rich with detail, which is the strength of the author. For instance, when they arrive at the trading post and search for what's left that hadn't picked over, it doesn't stop the story. It really illuminates the level of detail as to how this world has fallen. And then we get something that is just a complete departure from any story that we have gotten, both in The Stand and in this collection. And this what I keep saying, and I apologize for the redundancy and repetition here, but I was really looking for different perspectives, different slices of life, different geographical locations, and I get all of that here with The Mosque at the End of the World by Usman T. Malik. My God, we got so much of a different sort of story. All right, here we go with a story taking place, I believe it was in Pakistan. So we get a completely different geographical location, a completely different country, a completely different continent from everything we have experienced in The Stand. We have a culture unlike Western American culture. We have a main character with a different set of values and religious beliefs. We have different customs. So this was such a rich, immersive world. It was a door to go through into a life and a perspective that I was not familiar with, and I found it so refreshing. I found it so good, so well written, and it was so welcoming. As a reader, I felt it very welcoming. It didn't hold my hand, threw me right into it, and I loved it all for it. I got an understanding of the culture and the religion and the customs and the perspective. And what I thought was so bold about it was it didn't shy away from these supernatural elements. All right, we have the jinn as a part of this story. And it was interesting to have a story about supernatural elements that aren't tied into at all the supernatural elements that we have come to know with, Mother Abigail's, unnaturally long life and the dreams and Flag's magic. It was almost presented that any supernaturalism in the world of The Stand, it really stood out with these characters, and he kind of got the impression that was kind of it, right? That the dreams and Mother Abigail and Flag, these were the supernatural events that were occurring within this world. But no, I like this. This kind of opens up the world a little bit more and makes the world a little bit stranger, a little bit more textured, more nuanced by having these supernatural entities existing elsewhere in the world to enact their plots and their machinations. And what I liked is that what's happening in America, they're aware of it through their dreams, which I think is great. So they're still picking up on these radio signals. And that's what I like, is that they're not being talked to directly, right? But they understand what's occurring. They're picking up on this information that's being transmitted across the psychic plane. But they're having their own dreams, because their lives and their futures, it's going to be different from the characters in America. So it makes sense that they are going to have their own dreams of what they should do, and their own dreams of how to hope and what hope looks like in the city that they need to go build. Yeah, I really liked this one. This was a really, really good one. All right. And my favorite, my favorite of this collection was by Paul Tremblay. And if you have not read Paul Tremblay, he is, he is an established horror veteran at this point, who has written a number of books. The one that really put him on the map was about a decade ago, I would say. A Head Full of Ghosts was great. And he followed up with the disappearance at Devil's Rock, and the cabin at the end of the world, which was probably his most successful in terms of cross cultural appeal, due to the fact that it was published adapted by M. Night Shyamalan as a Knock on the Cabin. Is that what it's called? Which is a stupid title. Cabin at the End of the World is such a much better title. And again, everything about that book, it's good, and the movie's worth watching. Dave Bautista is amazing in it. But the potency and the moral quandaries and what he does so well in his books is he leaves it open to interpretation. He presents to you the information. He omits, portions of the story that would clearly identify the events of the story as one thing or another, and he says, "All right, reader, now you decide." And I really, really love that about him. And so I was really excited to see that he was going to be contributing to a story within the collection. So in much of a Paul Tremblay way, we have an unreliable narrator that reminded me of characters within the Pallbearers Club that he had written specifically as a character that is living in another character's basement, which seems directly taken from the Pallbearers Club. This is a story that it's totally different. It is stylistically different. It takes place, it's the first person perspective, and it's about something. So all of these made me really stand up and applaud Paul Tremblay for providing an entry into this collection, because for all of those reasons, it really stands out. So what this story does, it takes the concept of the end of the world and utilizes the power of story to make it about something. At one point in the story, the narrator relates how Art, the character Art, whose story is being told to us by another character, remembered his parents watching the 24-hour news cycle as the world fell apart. Now here is what I think he might be getting at here. And I think that really stood out to me, because I could be wrong. It's been a long time. 1990 was not a long time ago, and I was much younger then. But I can't remember it. But in 1990, when the events were first published, the events taking place within this particular story, I don't remember 24-hour news cycles the way that they are now, and they certainly weren't creators of reality for the person watching whichever 24-hour news cycle. 24-hour news cycles now do not tell the news. They create the news. They create the world in which the viewer is existing. I'm not saying that they didn't exist back then. I'm actually too lazy to research it. But it doesn't exist. They did not exist the way that they do today. And so though this takes place during the events of The Stand and literally takes place during the chronology of that book, to me, this is a story, really. This is a story of right now. It's not hard to imagine Art being a stand-in for everyman, the everyman. I mean, you can take it one step further and have Art be a representative of like a demographic, in a voting demographic, or even a key swing state. Okay, now think about it like this. I mean, he's a guy living in his house in the post-apocalypse, and his home keeps being besieged and intruded upon by these different opposing factions who are insisting themselves upon him. All right, they tell him why he needs to come with them, but at no point do they ask Art what he wants, or what he thinks, or what he believes, and continually emphasize his importance to their cause. Okay, so textually, this is supported by the main character, who regrets forcing his own ideas upon Art and not letting Art come up with his own. So there really is something there. And as I kind of bumble my way through this, I just want to be perfectly clear. I'm not saying this both sidesism. I'm not saying that the world that we find ourselves in is that both sides are equally bad. I am not saying that. Okay? But I am saying that the constant bombardment and assault that is occurring 24/7 can be enough for one person to say, nope, I'm done. I'm not going to have anything to do with anything. I just want to sit here and play my guitar. And maybe that's a cop-out, but there's a very large portion of the population that doesn't want to take action. They just want to live their lives, and I think that they're just sick of the noise. I'm not saying it's right, but, in the last election, we saw a drop-off in certain demographics. There was lower voting in certain areas, and I think part of it has to do with the amount of noise and people being talked at all of the time. As I literally talk at all of you, I do acknowledge that. But I think that there's something to be said about people wanting to block all of that out because of the frustration and just wanting to live their lives. And I think that maybe that's what Paul Tremblay is trying to say. Maybe I'm off base, but I got the sensation that there was something more to the story than just the story of someone in the wake of Captain Trips. And it was incredibly refreshing because for the most part, all that we've been getting from these stories is the story. Right? This is the first time that I have felt that the dreams aren't just the text and that they're subtext and stand-ins for a barrage of information from two opposing sides assaulting your, and in this case, the dreamer, art. So that's what I got out of that. Okay? All right, and then we get to part 3. And like I said with part 3, life is such a wheel. This phrase was taken from a quote of The Stand. Life was such a wheel that no man could stand upon it for long. And it always at the end came round to the same place again, which in turn is explored much more fully in a concept of Ka, the belief that Ka is a wheel in the pages of The Dark Tower. All right, now, like I said, unlike the previous 2 sections, I'm not going to talk about these stories out of order. I find that, though they may be different from story to story, they pass on like a baton of themes from author to author and story to story. The struggles of rebuilding society, bad habits, and most commonly, the uncertainty and danger of putting hope in the next generation because there's no guarantee that the next generation to be born will be safe from the lurking airborne fears of Captain Trips and the subsequent mutations of the virus throughout the decades is a constant theme and a constant worry. So I'm not going to rank them the way that I ranked the other 2 sections. Instead, I'm going to go in order, and up first we have He's a Righteous Man by Ronald Malfi. And I'm going to take a moment actually not to talk about this story, but I'm going to talk about Ronald Malfi. I've been wanting to podcast about him for a while now, for over a year. But quite honestly, I was just too busy simply enjoying reading his books to stop and talk about why I enjoy reading his books. So in the summer of 2024, I ordered the book Blackmouth, and I started reading it, and I thought it was okay. I liked it enough to recommend. I didn't love it, but I recognized that there was something about this author that I liked. So I said, you know what, I'm gonna check it out. So then I ordered a couple more books by him, and Small Town Horror I think had just come out, I really liked that. He has a firm handle on his characters, and he's able to put the reader in his stories in a very, very effective way that is very addictive. So I loved Small Town Horror, and then from there I was into it. So, I then ordered Snow, which I thought was a lot of fun. Floating Staircase, which was a nice mystery. Then you get books like December Park, which fans of Stand By Me or It are going to really appreciate. That is just a beautifully written story about, it's kids, there's a mystery in town, there's murders occurring. It's in many ways, I don't want to say adults versus children, but it's adulthood versus childhood, and the dawning realization that you're not going to be kids for much longer. Little Girls, The Night Parade. The Night Parade, I wasn't surprised that Ronald Malfi was going to have when I saw his name in this collection, I said, yeah, that makes sense. He wrote The Night Parade, which again it's another, it's really, really good. Bone White, Come With Me. Come With Me is so good. That is very Bags of Bonesian. If you like Bags of Bones and like that that deep ache, that sadness, that haunting, that propels the character forward, you're gonna love Come With Me. Yeah, and then I just gotta say, his novella work is on point. They Lurk has some really strong novellas, but then you get to something like Ghost Written. And I remember when I read 20th Century Ghosts and I lauded Joe Hill for his short story form, and that's what made me fall in love with Joe Hill. I think that 20th Century Ghosts is like a masterpiece of short story collections. And I gotta say, I don't know if I'm ever going to read a novella collection better than what Ghost Written was. This is 4 stories that are tied together through a concept, through a theme, and the events of one are referenced in another. But they're all about the dangers of books, of storytelling, of reality within story, and they're just fucking good. These are good novellas, and that collection, more than anything that I've read from him, show the power of what Ron Malfi is capable of achieving. He's now one of the guys that when he publishes it, whether just like Stephen King, just like Joe Hill, just like a couple other authors I'm going to talk about, one in particular later on, but Preston and Child and John Connolly, he's now on that list where if there's a new book coming out, I'm looking forward to that new book. And I strongly recommend the works of Ronald Malfi. If you like Stephen King, and I imagine that you do if you're listening to a podcast about Stephen King and Stephen King stuff, if this story, He's a Righteous Man, in this collection isn't enough to make you go out and get his other books and his other works, then please take my recommendation. Go out and he's got a lot of variety and there's a lot to dive into. He's really, really good. If nothing else, Ghost Written. Go with Ghost Written. It's great. Anyway, He's a Righteous Man. This is a very interesting story, and this is something that I wanted more of. First, it takes place after the events of The Stand, and so by the very nature of the story, it felt fresh. We don't have to deal with the dreams. We don't have to deal with deciding to take a pilgrimage to either Vegas or to Boulder. We don't have to watch survivors be wary of other survivors, unsure of what's in their hearts. As I've been saying, there's been too much of that, especially with the dreams. So to have something later in the chronology, it's fresh territory. And with it, Malfi does something very interesting. He gives us a story of a man who'd published a book just as the world was ending, a book whose events would wind up foretelling the events of The Stand. In this post-apocalyptic world, which is slowly getting back on its feet, he's seen as a prophet, and he spends his time traveling from town to town. And if that wasn't interesting enough, Malfi gives us an actual horror story, one with a setup and a payoff with a wonderful twist. In this new world, one born out of supernatural and divine dreams, it would stand to reason that the survivors would seek out more supernatural reasons for the events that occur in life. They lived through a biblical plague, watched a cosmic battle for the soul of humanity play out across America, witnessed the fire and brimstone destruction of the city of sin. So naturally, they're predisposed to believe in the unbelievable. And in a wonderful twist, Jacob Cree, this prophet, is strung up and crucified by the townfolk. They themselves zealots who believe that if they murder this man, who had foretold the doom of the world, that better luck would seep back into theirs. Also, this is the type of story I was interested in seeing more of. We knew about civilization being built in Las Vegas and in Boulder, but what about the other places? There were still others out there. What did these new communities look like? And so I was really glad to be able to start to get that. By the way, Malfi has a great observation about the worshiping of the crucifix, and it has an absolute chef's kiss of a payoff in the final sentence. This isn't just one of my favorite stories in this section. This is one of my favorite stories in the entire collection. And then we have Awaiting Orders in Flagston by Summer Cannon. Like the Ronald Malfi story, we get a glimpse into another community after the events of the stand. So again, for the same reasons that I liked that aspect of the previous story, I liked this one. What does... people aren't going to be gravitating just to these two places. Like, some people are just going to kind of, set up shop where they are. And I like that. So what happens to those places? What does that look like? In this case, these are defectors from Las Vegas. Another wrinkle, again. People left. People decided that they were going to step out of this main story. And I like this. Now they're living on the margins. And an influential, charismatic leader at the center poses a danger to our main character, Amy. It fits that those that had to that chose to follow Flag would fill the void with another similar figure. And just as the vision of Las Vegas crumpled spectacularly, so does Flagston. Much like the Ronald Malfi story, we're given a tale of what happens when survivors who had lived through magical events search for supernatural meaning where there is none. In this case, it's the story of 13-year-old Amy who hadn't dreamed of either Flag or Mother Abigail, and the witch-hunting-like fervor that grips the town. The torture of the girl in an attempt to force new dreams to validate the belief that Flag will come back. It's very hard to read. But the scapegoating of an innocent person is not unimaginable, and it concludes with the collapse of this little community and the suggested of mice and men styled mercy killing of Amy. All right. I talked about Ronald Malfi and the reasons why Ronald Malfi fit in this story, in this collection. For a number of reasons, but the Night Parade is a contribution to a post-apocalyptic world. And I was very happy when I saw the name Chuck Wendig as a contributor to this. Because, ladies and gentlemen, fans of The Stand really, once they're done with this, if you are looking for... if you're looking for a post-apocalyptic tale that chronicles the fall of civilization, and have it feel potent and not redundant, like so many post-apocalyptic stories have. I mentioned the Walking Dead already, but even a story like The Road, which I also mentioned, which is really well written. It adds a raw survivalism and danger and fragility to a world that's falling apart, but there's like a timelessness and there's like a lack of specificity to it. That's also its strength. However, Chuck Wendig very recently had written a two-part story. There is The Wanderers and Wayward, and it is very, very specific to right here and now, to the point where please understand and be warned that it is very prescient. My wife, she always asks me, like, what should I read next? And I go through my collection and I pick out a book that I think that she would like, and I have her, read it. And I really got into Wanderers and Wayward. And I gave it to her in June, I think, June of 25. Or no. 24, maybe. Whenever prior to the last election, the summer before the last election, before things were really starting to heat up. And then I took it back because I said to myself, you know what? No. Books sometimes need to be escapism. and my wife is not going to be able to escape with something this right now. But here's the thing: this is why the book stands out, because actually, kind of like He's a Righteous Man, which is a story about someone who wrote about events that ultimately came true. It's kind of what Chuck Wendig did with Wanderers. Look, we have a fascist party. We have the rise of hate. We have politicians and bad faith actors taking control of an anger and using it for power. The rise of AI, a pandemic, and all of this predated the events of 2020 by a year. And it is kind of scary how remarkable these events play out. Guess what starts the incurable disease that wipes out humanity? Bats. Seriously. This is a thrilling read. And he completely captures the dissolution of the country as the hate-filled ideology helps speed up its demise in a way that, like I said, it's very much rooted in the present. So I was very happy for him to be a contributor. And if you like this story, Grand Junction, then you're going to like Wanderers and Wayward. So Grand Junction tells the tale of Leaf, a young man living in Grand Junction, some 30 years since the end of the Stand. We get the introduction of Mother May I, awesome name, the elected leader of the town for the last 15 years, whose dreams and omens help shape her decision-making. In the years since the conclusion of the Stand, as hinted at by King, men with bad intentions would once again reclaim their role as leaders of mankind. We see that playing out in Boulder with the sheriff who was rising in power upon the conclusion of the story. And now, 30 years later in Telluride, a cultish figure by the name of John Lowe, again, cool name, has begun to assume power through violence and cannibalism. Mother May I leads a small group of 4 to Telluride, and on their way, Leaf bears witness to the cult of Lowe's violence in a town called Ouray, which is a nice Easter egg for fans of Wanderers and Wayward. Like the other 2 stories preceding this one, it feels like it's about something rather than events taking place within the world of the Stand. It's thrilling, it's dangerous, and it's hopeful. The coalescing of power around a prophesized child full of evil intent. It's a fascinating concept. Is this baby John Lowe actually evil? Or are these just stories that small-minded, misguided, fear-based folks have spread? Is Mother May I correct in stating that for there to be good, there must also be evil? And in the end, Leaf choosing hope and optimism is a nice balm after reading so many stories about the horrors of humanity. Then we have Hunted to Extinction by Premi Mohammed. Yeah, this was weird. This felt like a pre-existing story that was given a touch-up to fit in the anthology. Don't get me wrong. I like horror stories of monsters in the snow. But this one just felt very odd. It felt like a very odd inclusion. I do like the idea of the events of the Stand turning into myth and the investigations that went into piecing and piecing together of what occurred in America. I like that. I like that concept, but that's not the thrust of this. It's not about that. That is lost in the story of a child monster and its kin, who may or may not be working for Randall Flagg, who may or may not have returned. It's out of step with the established reality of the Stand and who Flagg is. This does not feel like Flagg, or how Flagg functions. It's not like Sauron, right, to me. Even though I get it, the Flagg is designed to be a post-apocalyptic Lord of the Rings set in America. I get that. But Flagg is very much an American character. And I get it. Yes, I know he's from Midworld. I understand that. But the depiction of Randall Flagg as first depicted in The Stand is an American figure. And that like the fact that he doesn't even know who he is, I kind of speaks to this a small-mindedness and a lack of perspective that the worst elements of America can take, right? So like this kind of all-knowing force gathering evil entities just does not seem Flag to me. It just felt weird. And then we came the last night of the sadness by Catherine M. Valenti. And I began reading this one and wasn't paying as much attention to it as I probably should have until the sequence came where Fern, the main character, when reading the stories of those left behind, began levitating off of the ground. Then I thought of the initials and how they're the backward initials for our buddy Randall. And from there, Catherine Valenti proceeded to give us something that I had both wanted out of this collection and something that I had feared about this collection. As you know, one of the things I've been looking forward to was the prospect of getting something new. And what I'd worried about was that stories involving characters from The Stand or directly related to The Stand would feel like fan fiction. By the time this story concluded, I closed this book because I needed to let this story settle. I felt this was the best of what that kind of story could be. Because it did just that, it did something new. And it honored what had come before without falling into the trap of fan fiction. And it made me think of what Damon Lindelof had done with Alan Moore's The Watchmen when he provided his show on HBO. It honored what came before, it referenced what came before, but it used what had come before to tell its own story about something, right? And that's what Catherine Valenti does with Came the Last Night of Sadness. Valenti gives us both snippets of this main character, Fern Ramsey, who appears both magical and mutated. And through the course of telling her story, we get to see the larger world of the United States of America in the post-apocalypse. In the post-apocalypse. She gives us rich details of the next challenges of life and the descriptions of nuclear power plants failing. It's a reality that was sad to see play out, but nevertheless inevitable. And she gives us some of the most beautiful passages, including the life of an elephant and her calf finding their way into a new world, and an incredible segment describing the death of a blue whale and the life that it gives to those that feed upon it for the next 200 years, with those survivors never knowing that the whale wasn't the world itself. I mean, there's some powerful passages and concepts and ideas and poetry just explored in this story. And all of this serves the greater purpose of the concept that life is a wheel and all goes round again, and this turn of the wheel must end with death. The common refrain that she gives us is that everything expires, but despite this, she gives us hope at the very end with the coda that everything expires, but it doesn't mean that it always goes bad. It's a beautiful ending to a beautiful story that really surprised me. It could have just been about this new character and the poignant descriptions of life in all of its various forms. But she also provides us with the growing threat, both as a concept and for Fern as something more personal as the rise of the dark man looms. And what I like about Valenti is that she gets it. She gets it that Flag, as a shadow, is more dangerous than when he's flesh and blood. So not by portraying him as this dream figure in all of his bluster, that there is such a fragility to that character. He rejects Fern because she's something new, and doesn't that just fit? If Flag represents the more limited aspects of America, doesn't that fit? That this character is rejecting and is afraid of this character because she's something new that he doesn't understand, and he feels that she doesn't belong. And yes, she confirms that this character, Fern Ramsey, is the daughter of Randall Flagg and Nadine Cross. How was she born? Is she suggesting that the unborn baby of Nadine crawled out of her dead body? No, I don't think it's anything that simple. It's more like the idea of this character found itself alive on this rotation of the wheel. It's weird, but honestly, what's interesting about this story is that it functions somewhere as a stylistic bridge between the Stand and the Dark Tower series. Blasted lands, mutants, dark dreams among the relics of a previous civilization. The idea of ideas blending together, bleeding together, where reality is just kind of like inserting itself, and it's messy, and it felt like a really nice wave between the Stand and the Dark Tower, and it kind of functions somewhere in between. I was really impressed with this one. Now we have The Devil's Children by Sarah Langan. This is the story of the descendants of survivors who hid during Captain Trips, and whose children and children's children remained hidden from the world and kept their distance in order to stay away from Captain Trips and any of the subsequent variations throughout the generations. They get captured by descendants of survivors and experimented on with scenes reminiscent of Stu being taken prisoner by the CDC. And in a twist in the experiments, which naturally go bad, those immune become sick with the new strain, and the ones who had not had immunity are now immune. So hopefully ending, it seems, to put a streak to Captain Trips and the sickness for good. Throughout each of the stories in this particular section, the complication, fears, uncertainties of childbirth and the next generations having immunity have been a theme that had been played with. And with this final story, it feels that this cycle has finally been broken. Okay, and then we have part 4. There are other worlds than these. And the first story we have is The Unfortunate Convalescence of the Super Lawyer, Nat Cassidy. Oh boy. This one was interesting. It begins with a mysterious man finding himself not quite sure how he suddenly arrived on this road. And the next thing we know, there's an earthquake, but it's not an earthquake. And then the author describes a straight line cutting through the clouds in the sky, but there's something wrong with it. And for anyone that has read a certain 7-book series, we realize that it wasn't an earthquake at all. That, my friends, is called a beamquake. And then that made me perk up. So I was like, ooh, what are we going to get here? And we get glimpses and flashes of allusions to other works of King. Maybe not outright connections, but enough to tease and remind us. It makes sense. After all, a beamquake just happened. It happens when realities begin to bleed into each other. So the Plymouth, the main character is driving. Who's to say it's not a Plymouth Fury? And when it's acknowledged that this character likes to draw, it's not hard to imagine Patrick Danville. We never quite found out what happened after he walked off the pages the last time that we saw him. We get an interesting and cute little nod to the joy and comfort that comes with working with other people's fictions in an anthology based on Stephen King's fictions. It's an impressive collection because he's an artist. No need to be modest about it. He was quite talented. He could have pursued a career as an illustrator or a comic book artist if he were a bolder, braver, more reckless man. More like his dad, in other words. Instead, he settled for something far more practical, and it was a good thing he did. As any good lawyer understands, settling is always the wisest thing to do. He hasn't added anything new to the notebook in a while, but he still likes to look at it during times of stress. It helps him feel moored to some secret truer self. One that manages to survive despite the daily deluge of statutes and case law and legal briefs and discovery demands and forensic reports. Ironic, he supposes, considering these drawings are mostly of other people's creations. That's always been a big part of the appeal, though. He prefers playing in those kinds of sandboxes where the rules are already in place. Creating your own work is just so messy, so unsettling. And then, guys, okay, then something happens that, holy shit, okay, I lost it, okay, and the only way that a fan of Stephen King truly can. In a twist that I did not see coming, our main character and his new companion Susie encounter two men arguing about a door. Okay, so for a second I think it's going to be two specific men, but then wham, surprise. It is the long-awaited, never-before explored sequel, kind of, to Eyes of the Dragon. At long last, it's the return of Peter and Dennis, last glimpsed in the end of Eyes of the Dragon as they go in search of the wizard flag, and mentioned again in Drawing of the Three. Immediately, they mention that the beams are breaking, and they reference the e-readers from the short story Ur. Ezra and Susie flee from the two, thinking that they're lunatics, argue about the state of this world, and the haunting refrain of having been forgotten before encountering what appears to be a low man in a yellow coat, at least at first. Or maybe more. Maybe he's more than that. He speaks in riddles, teasing that they are all characters from different stories in a larger tale currently being rewritten. And I realized at this point that we're not going to get Peter and Dennis again, and I got really kind of frustrated with the story that it was then going to just kind of be a metatextual sprinkling of different references to Stephen King works rather than taking some characters and doing something more bold with it. And again, that's very hypocritical of me because I have been for almost 2 hours now talking about how I hadn't want characters directly written by Stephen King to get more time by authors because it would read like fan fiction. And what am I asking for? Fan fiction. And I realized that the tale of Peter and Dennis, though I'm not the biggest fan of Eyes of the Dragon, I really was intrigued at their reference in the Drawing of the Three and how they passed through Gilead on their quest for Flag and how they almost got him. Some things don't need to be told. I totally get it. The Battle of Jericho, they don't need to be told. But I wouldn't complain if we got that story. Anyway, we get some glimpses of Stu, Tom Cullen, and Kojak. And then Susie and Ezra find a freestanding door whose handle is a carved picture of a hand made of eyes. I am the doorway. Waka waka. Oh, Discordia, the low man cries before quoting the This Is 9 countdown from 1408. From the collection 1408, not the... No, it is 1408. Yeah, no, I'm sorry. It is from 1408. And this all concludes with the death rattle of a man dying from Captain Trips, with everything had occurred being the fever dream of a not quite character who had been written out of the stand when it was republished. And it actually turns this kind of like into a dark mirror of the We Contain Multitudes theme of the life of Chuck. So it kind of works on multiple levels. I really liked this one. I liked this one for what it almost was, more than actually what it was, but it was still fun. And just a different, again, I wanted bolder, more different takes in this collection. I definitely got it. And then we get Walk on Gilded Splinters by David Sho, which is just it's a story taking place over 1,000 years in the future with biblical text having sprung up around the life of the Trash Can Man. No more, no less. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of the world as we know it. The question is it something that I recommend? I think your mileage may vary on this. I think that the highs are very high. I think the lows are very low, and the majority of the stories don't do anything new. What was so strong about The Stand, and the reason why decades and decades and decades later there is a collection of short stories inspired by The Stand, is because The Stand is such a powerful piece of work. Stephen King, with all of the different characters who come from all these different backgrounds, it's basically, he did the anthology already. He gave us all of these different lives with all of these different dreams and all of these different conflicts and all of these different hopes and all of these different fears. Like he gave us all of these snippets of life. And he gave us stories of horror and bleakness. But ultimately, all of those vignettes that he gave us when the times were dark were all leading to the moment where our characters stood up and said no. And even though there's tragedy, there's hope in humanity. Here, for the most part, we get bleak story after bleak story of the darkness of humanity after the darkness of humanity, and it gets very repetitive and numbing after a while because it's not leading towards an ultimate statement of the reclamation of society at this moment in time by those who have good in their hearts. No, instead we just get, stories being explored during this time frame. And if you're going to do that and it's untethered from a larger narrative and you're not going to explore these characters past the 15 or so pages that you have them for, then you're going to get stories that need a conflict. And when you have stories that need a conflict in a post-apocalyptic world, you're going to, for the most part, get stories about awful circumstances. That's why the stories like Lockdown, Pig's Eye, especially Wrong Fucking Place, Wrong Fucking Time, more than anyone else, do something different. They did something different. They gave you a different kind of conflict. And another thing about Wrong Fucking Place, Wrong Fucking Time, I really like that these characters said, "No, we're not going to do any of this Vegas or Boulder thing. This is our home. This is our life, and this is where we're going to be." That's another thing that I really, really liked. So don't get me wrong. There's some good stuff in here. And I've pointed them out. I strongly, you know what? It's worth buying it. Yes, you should buy it. A lot of work went into this. And whether you feel the way that I do about it or not is kind of irrelevant. Because you have a number of short stories written by a variety of different authors that you may or may not be familiar with. And even if there's an author whose story I didn't particularly like at this time, who's to say that you will feel the same way? Maybe you'll feel exactly a different way. Maybe there'll be something in that story that you latched onto that I wasn't able to latch onto. And through that latching on, maybe it spoke to you in a way that it didn't speak to me, and it causes you to seek out more works by that author, and then you fall in love with that author the way that over the last couple of years I have fallen in love with Ron Melfi. Chuck Wendig and Paul Tremblay, of course. I was very, very happy to see their names involved in this. And if you like their stories, like I said, there's some good stuff out there. Like I said, I've been meaning to talk about Ron Melfi in a while, but there's another author. There's another author that over the past year I have fallen madly in love with. I hope to be able to share my thoughts on them prior to their next publication, which is scheduled to come out in December. So hopefully I'll be able to do that for everyone. But yeah, in the meantime, feel free to go out and get a copy of The End of the World as We Know It. It is there's something to be said about cracking it open and stepping back into the world of The Stand. At the end, Brian Keene gives a very nice afterword on the power of The Stand and the joy and comfort that comes from being able to love a thing for so long and be able to go back to it time and time again, and especially for a story that is built on the themes of reoccurring cycles, to be able to go back and to go back and to go back. And then now, as he states, now you have this as well, which I'm holding in my hands and shaking at the podcast microphone. Now you have this as well. And when I was reading this, even if I was frustrated with a particular story or the limited perspective of a particular story, the entire time I thought to myself, are there other stories that we can do this with? And I started to think about The Dark Tower and how rich and malleable and open to interpretation that world is, or that of the territories. We got a little bit of that with the story where all of the worlds were kind of crashing together. We had Doors, we had Low Men, we had Eyes of the Dragon, we had a Plymouth, we had I Am the Doorway, we had the E-Reader, and I thought that, what? We could get another compilation just like this. Discordia, that was also mentioned, if I didn't say that before. But we could have a Dark Tower related collection of short stories that I think that is a world. That is worlds. And there's the title right there. Go then. There are other worlds. There are other worlds than these. It's writing itself, right? Brian Keene, Christopher Golden. That should be your sequel. There are other worlds than these. Convince Cy King to get that done. Because that I think is rich for exploration. There's so many dark corners that were hinted at but never illuminated within those 7 books, 7.5 if you count Wind Through the Keyhole, or more than that, Little Sisters of Illyria. Anyway, guys, at this point, I'm kind of punchy. I need to tap out. It's been a long podcast. It's like the old days, isn't it? For those of you tuning in who stuck through this entire episode, I used to give multi-hour podcast reviews. It's been much shorter in the last couple of years. But hey, you know what? There was a lot to talk about in this particular collection. It was a fun way to spend a Friday night with all of you. So, everyone, I don't know when I'm going to turn record on the next time. It could be for a review of The Monkey. It could be for a review of The Long Walk or Life of Chuck, or The Running Man, or some horror stories that I think that you should read. Who knows? All I know is that I appreciate your listenership and your support throughout the years. Hey, until I see you again, may you have long days and pleasant nights, and I'll see you next time, where MOON spells Stephen Kingcast.